I bet. I ain't gonna lie, this is just a little quick overview on the video that Traplo Ross made, King Von, rap's first serial killer. Now, if you notice, the video is like 3 hours long, so this is just a little overview of people who don't have 3 hours to just sit there and watch this. The documentary is longer than the Avatar movie, about as long as the Avatar movie. No, it's longer than the Avatar movie. As a matter of fact, it's 3 hours long. So I watched the full 3 hour documentary. It's a good documentary. Traplo Ross did his thing. He did his research. He did a good amount of research, a lot of research. For that matter, for it to be 3 hours long, he covered a lot. Basically, King Von's whole life in the streets, and him transitioning into rap, and his death. So basically, I'm gonna just give y'all a little quick overview of what the whole video entailed and what he went into in the video. Nothing more, nothing less. So let's get into it. Now, there are 17 segments to this documentary that Traplo Ross made. There's the intro, King Von's early life, Von becomes a demon, the murder of Modell, the murder of P5, the murder of Boss Trail, the murder of Lil James, the murder of Lil Mark, the murder of KI, the murder of Malcolm Stuckey, from killer to rapper, Von's transition, the murder of Can't Get Right, Von v. Ruski versus Ruski, Von and Dirk slide together, the king of self-snitching, Asian Doll and NBA Youngboy, Von's big mistake, and finally but not least, the death of King Von. Now we'll just start in order how I named them all off, beginning with Von's early life. In the first segment, Traplo Ross goes into a bit more into detail about Von's early life, about how Von lost his father's life at a skating ring when he was shot by a sniper rifle. Yeah, a sniper rifle. I don't know how that happened, but he was shot and killed by a sniper rifle while at a skating ring. He will go into detail about how King Von would be in Killer Ward up until 2008, where he would move to Parkway Gardens, also known as O Block, and was also known as Wick City. He would also go into detail about how King Von was toting guns in 10th grade and having guns in school and all that stuff. He goes into a bit more detail than what I saw from a lot of other documentaries, a bit more into his early life. But the next segment that I'm going to get into now is Von becomes a demon. Now in this segment, this shows him transitioning and being more affiliated and more being into the killings and the gang banging and more of the killings on that side. He went into detail on how the death of his friends OD Perry, and Platoon, and White would ultimately change his plans for the future and how he went about handling himself and carrying himself. Well, that's basically it on that segment. There really isn't much on that segment because the segment name is pretty self-explanatory. Von becomes a demon. So on to the next segment. So the next couple of segments deals with the murders that King Von have been associated or allegedly associated with or did himself. We have murders like the murder of Modell, the murder of P5, also known as Crack, the murder of Boss Trail, the murder of Lil James, and the murder of Lil Mark, the murder of KI, and the murder of Malcolm Stuckey. I'm going to go over these relatively lightly and quickly because most of these murders a lot of people already know, like the murder of KI. There's been a bunch of documentaries on the murder of KI and the murder of Lil Mark. So starting off with the murder of Modell. In the murder of Modell, Traplo Ross will go into detail about Modell and his 18-year-old cousin were on their way to meet a girl when somebody walked up, opened fire, and shoot him and his cousin, would shoot at Modell and his cousin as the two went to go meet a girl. Now, nobody was ever charged for the murder, but Years later, it would come out that King Von was positively identified as the shooter by witnesses. Now, in the murder of P5, aka Crack, Traveler Ross will go into detail about the murder and how P5 was shot multiple times at 9:13 a.m. and would be pronounced dead at 9:54 a.m. 3 minutes just before the shooting of P5, King Von would tweet out LMAO just 3 minutes before the shooting. Then at 9:13, Von tweets 45th make his ass do 40 flips. 9:13 would be the estimated time that the police say the shooting happened. And just a day after the murder, he would tweet, "Damn, I'm really messed up in the head. Man, I think I'm crazy for real." And then just 2 days after the shooting, King Von would tweet, "Damn, Modell got killed in October in Crack. Who gon' get killed in November? Stay tuned." Alright, moving along to the next segment, the murder of Boss Trail. Now, Boss Trail is a 17-year-old boy who was killed in the Wrightwood neighborhood. The body, identified by the Cook County Medical Examiner officers as Rodney Stewart, aka Boss Trail, was found 6:50 a.m. Now, Boss Trail had suffered from a gunshot wound to the head and was taken to the hospital, but Boss Trail would be pronounced dead by 11:30 p.m. on Thursday. King Von would tweet LOL #the struggle, with also King Von's friend T. Roy getting on the action on Twitter, tweeting "No, Trail, stay alive." This will be followed up by King Von with another tweet saying LOL, you ain't a boss to me. The next murder Traveler Ross would talk about would be the murder of Lil James, in which 4 people would approach his property and open fire, shooting him in both the arm and the chest, with him being pronounced dead at the hospital less than an hour later. A police report would later describe King Von's height and body build, but unfortunately for Von, 3 days after the murder of Little James, he would be locked up, and Von would stay in jail from November 2012 to February 2014. The next murder Traveler Ross would talk about would be the murder of Lil Mark. Now, Lil Mark's death would stem from him remixing a song from Lil Durk and using it to diss OTF. Now, Traveler Ross goes into details on the murder of Lil Mark, explaining how while he was standing at a bus stop, a silver minivan pulled up and masked up men jumped out, shooting Lil Mark in the head, with Lil Mark ultimately being pronounced dead at the scene. And the minivan that was connected in the murder and in the shooting of Lil Mark was later found engulfed in flames. Now, Traveler Ross expresses that King Von most likely did not do the shooting. King Von was just present for the murder, even posting a clip to social media of them returning to the crime scene.
Hey, it's a 251st!
Damn, body down.
Oh, not go see something, bro. Tweaking, bro.
Body down. 51st. Gang.
Man,
And not only would King Von go to the bus stop, Lil Durk would also make a trip to the bus stop.
Hey, this bus stop right here though, this a real famous place, you hear me? This is a real famous place, B. Hey, this bus stop, this is a real famous place, B. I ain't gonna lie to you.
The next murder Traveler Ross talks about is the murder of Ki, aka Jakira Barnes. Most of y'all may have heard of Jakira Barnes, being known as the infamous female shooter in Chicago. But Ki would be gunned down on April 11, 2014. Details would describe a shooter hopping out of a car while Ki was getting ready to shoot dice with another man. They would run into a gangway, but the shooter would continue to keep firing. Ki would be shot 9 times and declared dead 2 hours later. Von would be picked up by the police the next day, but would never formally be charged with murder. The next murder Trap Lord Ross would cover would be the murder of Malcolm Stuckey. In the murder of Malcolm Stuckey, King Von would attend a party where he spotted two members from the rival gang. Von will leave the party and get a friend named Big Mike. Von and Big Mike will return to the party and park down the street and approach a group of 3 men outside the house and open fire. 3 of them will be hit by gunfire while Von would chase them, shouting, "Why are you running?" When the shooting stopped, a man by the name of Malcolm Stuckey, a 19-year-old, would be declared dead with a gunshot wound to the head. In more detail, Trap Lord Ross reveals that King Von was trying to kill 2 of the rival gang members that he saw at the party, ultimately hitting 3 people, but Malcolm, who allegedly wasn't the intended target or who wasn't even involved in the game. And even more, Trap Lord Ross says this is why King Von never dissed Malcolm Stuckey in any of the songs, because he had nothing to do with the gang war. Basically saying, allegedly, King Von shot and killed an innocent person. And also, get this, King Von did a shooting in his prom suit. The night of prom, he went out and got into a shooting in his prom suit. Witnesses identified him as wearing a white suit. This man did a shooting in a white suit. What? There might have been something really wrong with him. Like, this man did a shooting in his white suit on prom night. No. And that shooting that he did in his prom suit would ultimately lead to his arrest. And then the following month, after getting arrested in his prom suit, he would get charged with the murder of Malcolm Stuckey. King Von will remain in jail awaiting trial for the murder of Malcolm Stuckey from June 2014 to December 2017. But while awaiting trial, King Von would ultimately receive one of the worst news of his life. His right-hand man T-Roy will get killed at a convenience store on Valentine's Day in 2017. The next segment Trap Lord Ross will talk about is from killer to rapper Von's transition. Von would be released from jail December the 6th, 2017. His first tweet from jail would be on, "Oh, I'm trying to figure out how this work again." Trap Lord Ross would go on to state how King Von got locked up again in 2018, February the 14th, the 1-year anniversary of T-Roy's death. The next segment Trap Lord Ross would talk about would be the beef between Von and Wooski. Now, Von and Wooski have been going back and have been beefing since all the way back to 2012. Now, Von and Wooski had an infamous back and forth on Twitter back in the day, trying to catch each other lacking at the convenience store. The two would argue more on Twitter about who would be the first to get killed. Von will go on to even brag to Wooski about having more bodies and more attempts than him. Wooski would even go on to make a song dissing King Von's friends White and OD. King Von would even FaceTime Wooski, telling them that they will catch them by surprise.
That's your big brother, you know. I wish I could say one of y'all was my boys. We got all goofies over there.
I ain't telling you what to do it tonight on
What's y'all off the courage? What made y'all do it tonight? Listen, we gon' surprise. You talking about tonight. We gon' surprise, bro. Some bitches out for the free. But you talking about tonight.
Wooski would ultimately get shot in the head at a funeral for his friend Dusky, but will survive. But even being shot in the head and surviving, Wooski is still alive to this day, outliving King Von. The next segment Trap Lord Ross will talk about would be Von and Dirk Slide Together, which is one of the 2 longest segments in the documentary that he has. The other one being the King of Self-Snitching that will come up right after this one. In the Von and Dirk Slide Together segment, Trap Lord Ross, I'ma just say Trap talks about Tariq Livid, a 24-year-old who died from his injuries, but later on a rumor will circulate that King Von had something to do with this shooting. And Trap explicitly states that there is no concrete evidence that Little Dirk or King Von had anything to do with the killing, But on February the 5th, 2019, allegedly, Lil Durk and King Von were outside of the Atlanta restaurant The Varsity. An altercation would take place in the parking lot, along with Lil Durk, King Von, THF Bezu, and Hella Bands allegedly shot and robbed a man for $30,000. He also states detectives will point out that Lil Durk would be shooting out of his own personal car, a custom Jeep Trackhawk with the 300 logo on the side. After Lil Von and Lil Durk was in custody, an Atlanta judge would find probable cause to charge Lil Durk and King Von with attempted murder. Von will ultimately post a $250,000 bond for the Varsity shooting, and in a live would say that Von would be getting out the next day. Von would also be granted a $300,000 bond, being released on June the 22nd. The next segment Trap would talk about would be the King of Self-Snitching. In the segment of the King of Self-Snitching, Trap will go over the death of FGB Duck. Now, only 7 minutes after the killing of FGB Duck, King Von would tweet out an emoji of a goat. Von would even tweet how him and FGB Duck settled their differences before his death. Did I also forget to mention that King Von likes cereal?
I've said it before that I believe Von was a serial killer, but honestly, he's mentioned cereal so many times during his career, it really wouldn't surprise me if this was some kind of cryptic message that he was using to signal to fans that he saw himself as a serial killer, with Duck as his latest victim. He would strangely tweet about how much he loves his cereal after a series of alleged murders in 2012, even tweeting that eating cereal is the first thing he does after shooting someone. He would promote Durk's cereal whilst they were both on the run from the Atlanta shooting at the Varsity, telling people on Twitter to buy the cereal whilst waving a clip of a gun, and regularly posting himself on social media eating cereal. And he would also be eating cereal when he told the world that he wanted to perform at FBG Duck's funeral.
Yeah, cereal be busting, so they say King Von featuring FBG Duck.
So that's what they want to see.
Stop that, man. I'll perform at his funeral.
Then, when we finally saw the actual murder of FBG Duck and academics asked him about it, at that very moment, Von would decide to start eating cereal too. Maybe it's a stretch.
Interesting point I just thought I'd make. The next segment that he would cover would be Asian Doll and NBA Youngboy Von's big mistake. Now in this segment he would cover of how NBA Youngboy and King Von would go back and forth beefing, switching out each of their girls, sending shots at each other and getting with each other's girl, NBA getting with Asian Doll, King Von's ex, and King Von getting with NBA Youngboy's baby mother. King Von would even say in a song, Mine Too, I got beef up in NOLA, where NBA Youngboy is from in Baton Rouge.
Actually being rumoured that Asian had met up with Youngboy at some point during this time, with later DMs from people in NBA Youngboy's camp suggesting that Asian Doll had indeed hooked up with Youngboy before King Von passed away. And Asian Doll would seemingly admit to hooking up with Youngboy twice on her song No Exposing. Apparently Youngboy even had access to Asian Doll's phone and Instagram account during the time they had spent together, as he had reportedly messaged his producer through Asian Doll's Instagram account. And then, only days before King Von would end up losing his life, on November the 4th, 2020, Youngboy posts a snippet of a song that he made with Asian Doll.
And in the final segment, the death of King Von, Trap speaks about the death of King Von. In the last segment, would give details of all that led up to that incident, the night where Quando Wando's right-hand man, Lil Tim, would shoot King Von.
Footage of the fight and subsequent shooting would circulate online after the incident. What happened that night is that Von walked up to Quando Rondo and sucker punched him outside the club and proceeding to beat him up in front of a huge crowd. But after throwing a few punches, Quando's friend Lil Tim would jump out of a car and shoot King Von 4 times. Von's friends from O Block, Slutty and Louie would attempt to shoot Lil Tim, leaving him wounded but not dead. After shooting Lil Tim to the ground, they would attempt to execute him on the floor, but the gun would jam. Whilst this is going on, a wounded King Von continues to wrestle with Quando Rondo on the floor. At this point, Von's other friend Muwop would approach, punching Quando Rondo to the ground and separating him from Von. Meanwhile, after failing to execute Lil Tim, Slutty and Louie would attempt to flee the scene, without realising that they were running directly towards undercover police officers who would open fire, believing that their lives were in danger too. The police would kill Slutty and leave Louie in critical condition. Muwop and other O Block members would drag King Von's limp body to a waiting car and rush him to the hospital. But what's even more crazy is that Quando Rondo would take Lil Tim to the very same hospital that King Von and his team were at, with Quando Rondo even going live, showing himself trying to get Tim into the hospital and get assistance. THF Bezu would later post saying that he'd seen Quando at the hospital suggesting that they would have shot him if he didn't start recording. But ultimately, King Von would be rushed into emergency surgery in critical condition after the shooting. He would ultimately die in hospital, with media all around the world waking up to the news and reporting on his death.
After King Von's death, friends of the people who allegedly King Von killed would post on social media. Even affiliates of Youngboy would mock the death of King Von.
The joke's on you, you diss, now you getting rapped on. Yeah. Yeah.
Funeral homes were also refusing to take King Von's body due to the fear of shooting. And even when they found a funeral home, they were forced to have it at a day's notice. But even in death, King Von Ops would ultimately still disrespect him by going to his gravesite and taking a picture of them standing on his gravesite. Towards the end of the video, Trap would go in and talk about how Quando Rondo would talk about the incident months later and even gives his opinion on King Von, that if he was alive today, he would be facing life in prison.
By the time he died, he had been connected to at least 11 murders that I've read about, but ultimately we'll probably never know the full extent of Von's activities in the streets. There's no doubt that Von was a prolific gangbanger and shooter, but having spent so much time analysing him and the things that he did in his life, it's hard to ignore the pleasure and pride that he seemed to get, not just from killing, but being known as a killer. An everyday gang member or even mob hitman tends to kill for survival or money, but for Von, reading all of his tweets and lyrics, it's clear that he derived a great deal of psychological pleasure from the killings that he was associated with. It seemed like he was more satisfied by carrying out a hit in the streets than making a hit record, and perhaps that's why, when he got rich and famous as a rapper, he couldn't leave that in the past, because he wasn't killing to survive, he was killing for fun, and gaining satisfaction from the whole world knowing what he had done. Someone like Jeffrey Dahmer was known for targeting black gay men in his community, partly due to the fact that he knew he could get away with it. And when it comes to King Von's alleged victims, it seems like he had a type too. Young black men and women from the same poor and overpopulated area he was from. Because, perhaps like Jeffrey Dahmer, Von knew that the cops simply didn't care enough to solve these crimes, so he knew he would get away with it. And he did get away with it. For his entire life. Von would beat every murder investigation that his name was ever placed in. But if he was alive today, he very well may have been facing a life in prison for his role in the killing of FBG Duck.
All in all, it was a good documentary. The 3-hour-long documentary wasn't that bad. It took me about 3 days to watch the whole documentary. But I do have a question though. Should people say R.I.P. King Von, knowing that he allegedly had something to do with 10 murders? Should people say R.I.P. King Von, knowing that he has something to do with 10 murders, along with one innocent person that was killed, Malcolm Stuckey? Should people say R.I.P. King Von? I'll let y'all decide that, but this was a good watch. I should do more of these, shouldn't I?
They put the ball in my hand, I'ma shoot it. I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-star recruiter. She come over late night just to get booted. I'm finna go take flight. You took the safe route, boy, you ain't safe now. I play my cards right, cut like a steak knife. I'm in my second life, posted on crease side. I've been the one since 97 on God. Driving boat like Brian and Wade. With this heat, they gon' ride the wave. With this mic, I'ma touch me and million. Your feelings in the way ain't gon' handle your business. You can put it on God, nigga, fuck your feelings. They ain't gon' get what you want. I can go pop my shit right now, do